Good afternoon, Facebook. It's that time again. I want to welcome you to our Bible study. We're continuing in Daniel chapter 8. We got through Daniel chapter 7, looked at some pretty unique things there with the beast and everything, and we studied a little bit about Armageddon and the two different battles there yesterday. Today we're getting into Daniel chapter 8. Now, part of this is history. It was still future for Daniel, but the other part of it is actually for the distant future that we haven't seen yet. But some of it's already taken place; it's prophecy fulfilled. You know, a lot of people say that they, if God would show them a miracle or something, that they would actually believe and they would trust in God. Well, you know, God shows us miracles all the time, and we just don't see them. I mean, Jesus performed miracles when he was on this earth. And people believed that he was the Son of God. But nowadays, people are still asking for more miracles. If God would just show me something great. Well, I want to show you something great today, okay? This was written close to probably, let's say, 2,500 years ago, all right? And in Daniel's time, it was written 200 years before some things actually took place when he had this vision. Because this is another vision that he had in Daniel chapter 8. He had the first one, which was talking about the four beasts. And but this vision he had was about actually the interpretation of some things that's going to happen in the future during the time of the tribulation time, and also it's already happened during the time right after Babylon was conquered by the Medes and the Persians, and then so on, which goes back to Daniel chapter 2, which talks about the statue, the head of gold, the arms and chest of silver, the belly of bronze, and the legs of iron, and so on and so forth. Because we know Babylon was the head of gold in that statue in Daniel chapter 2, and we know that the silver and arms, or chest and arms, were a combination of the Medes and the Persians. It represented them, another kingdom, world kingdom, and then we know that the bronze for the waist and the belly was also representative of Greece, and then we also know the two legs of arm was representative of Rome. We know that from history of what happened. But here we are, we're going back into this, but some things here happen. There's partial reference here to the Antichrist in the future, and also some things that actually happened in Daniel's time. So I'm going to kind of read some verses here. We're going to kind of go over them. We're not going to spend a lot of time because this is probably going to take me a few days to get through Daniel chapter 8 for us to understand it. But Daniel starts, he has this vision, and it's in the third year of reign of Belshazzar, the king. And this vision appeared to him, starting with verse 1. He said, I looked in the vision, and while I was looking, I was in the citadel of Susa, which is in the province of Elam. And I looked in the vision, I myself was beside the Ulai Canal. Now this is important. This little citadel of Susa in the province of Elam was insignificant at the time. But we know from history that the Medes and the Persians set their capital up in this place. So he was taken there before it ever happened, and he was given a vision there. He said, I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a ram which had two horns was standing in front of the canal. Now the two horns were long, but one was longer than the other, with the longer one coming up last. So he's looking at this vision of this ram. Now, who is this ram? You know, I've said before that the Bible interprets itself. Okay, I hear people say all the time, you know, I've read this passage, and you know, when I just can't find an answer to it or anything. You just can't read one passage and expect it to interpret itself. You have to read before and you have to read after. And sometimes you have to go to different areas of the Bible. But if you're persistent and you keep asking the Holy Spirit to be with you, he will interpret this. I'm going to show you what I mean right here. It says, I lifted my eyes and looked, and behold, a ram which had two horns was standing in front of the canal. And now the two horns were long, but one was longer than the other, with the longer one coming up last. If you jump down to verse 20, an angel reveals to Daniel what the ram represents. It says, the ram which you saw with the two horns represents the kings of the Media and Persia. We know that happened. He's telling him in this dream, this vision, that it's representing Medes and the Persians. Okay, that's what this ram is. So hang on here, watch this. And I saw the ram budding westward, northward, southward, and no other beast could stand before him, or no other empire. Remember, beast represented nations, and there was anyone to rescue from his power, but he did as he pleased and magnified himself. We know the Medes and Persians, they conquered all different directions, except they never went east. We learned from history they never went east. For some reason, something prevented them from doing that. But we know underneath Darius and Cyrus, a joint, whatever you want to call it, coalition, they come in and conquered Babylon. Remember, this is a few years before, this is during the time of King Belshazzar. this is before the handwriting on the wall, probably 2 or 3 years, but it did happen exactly like God said it was going to happen in the vision that he gave Daniel. We know the Medes and Persians conquered them. But here's what happened. It says, while I was observing, behold, a male goat was coming from the west over the surface of the whole earth without touching the ground, and the goat had a conspicuous horn between his eyes, a prominent horn, huge horn. Okay? He came up to the ram that had 2 horns, which I had seen standing in front of the canal, and rushed at him in a mighty wrath. And I saw him come beside the ram, and he was enraged at him, and he struck the ram and shattered his 2 horns, and the ram had no strength to withstand him, so he was hurtled him to the ground and trampled on him, and there was none to rescue the ram from his power. The male goat magnified himself exceedingly, but as soon as he was mighty, the large horn was broken, and in place there came up 4 conspicuous horns towards the 4 winds of heaven. So now we hear about this goat. This goat, if you jump down to verse 21, an angel reveals to Daniel what this goat is. The shaggy goat represents the kingdom of Greece, and the large horn that is between his eyes is the first king. The broken horn and the 4 horns that arose in its place represent 4 kingdoms which will arise from this nation, although not with his power. So now he's got the interpretation. We do know from history that Median Persians were destroyed by Alexander the Great in Greece. Okay, they came from the west, and that's exactly where he came from. He did it so fast, he conquered, and he didn't let nothing stand. He trampled everything, the people, everything. He conquered so quickly. And we do know this. This vision talks about the horn being broke off, which means his kingdom's going to come to an end. Alexander the Great died at the age of 33. All right, at the prime of his leadership, he was cut off. And we do know that 4 generals took over his reign, or took over and divided the kingdom up into 4 different areas, north, south, east, and west. We know that his 4 generals, one was Cassandra, took Greece and Macedon. Lysimachus took Asia Minor, which is now Turkey and Thrace. Seleucus took Syria and Babylon, and Ptolemy took Egypt and Palestine, and where the Gaza Strip is now. We do know that happened, all right? But here's something unique about all this, too, as we're talking about this. What's the big deal about the goats and the ram? Well, history also tells us that the Medes and Persians used the ram as their nation's symbol. They took it from a place in the sky, okay? And when you look that up, it's I've got them sitting down here. They took it to the symbol of Aries, the astrological, what I'm trying to say here, the study of the stars, okay? The symbols that are in the sky that gives us directions at night and tells us of seasons and all that. They took that symbol of Aries, and Aries represents a ram. Now, if we go on with this too, we also found out that Alexander the Great took the sign of a goat, which was Capricorn, and that represented the goat. We know this from history. So now we can back up here just for a second. With that being said, and we know that this was 200 years before it ever happened, gave Daniel this vision, and it fulfilled just like God's word said it would. We can also take chapter 7 with the 4 beasts, with the lion that stood up on its rear feet, and the wings of an eagle that was plucked from it, and the bear, and the leopard. Remember in that last study on Daniel 7, I talked about how the lion standing on his back feet is the symbol, the beast of England. And they took that on their crest. That's what their crest is. And the wings of eagles could represent the United States because we were the support behind them. We finally separated ourselves during World War I, World War II. We just kept growing more distance from them. But we were a big influence in their help during that time. We also in Russia knows that it's got a symbol of the bear, and it's with ribs in its mouth, devouring. You know what I mean? We know that Russia has been a very terrible, terrible nation, represented by that beast. And we also know that possibly in the near future, a coalition of the Arabs and probably African nations represented by the leopard will rise up right before the one world government comes into play underneath the Antichrist. And that's what we're getting ready to get into here. Because right at this point, when we talk about in verse 8 that the 4 horns come up and went 4 different directions towards the 4 winds of heaven, it says, out of one of them came forth a rather small horn, which grew exceedingly great towards the south, towards the east, and towards the beautiful land. It's actually referring to Antiochus Epiphanes. He was a wicked leader that rose up right after Alexander the Great was destroyed. Okay, during the time of these generals, he rose up and he did some very terrible things we're going to talk about. But this horn also represents in the future of the Antichrist, because some of the prophecies about what he did here does not fulfill all the properties of little horns. Now we know little horns and big horns or whatever represents kingdoms all through the Bible, so we have no disagreement here. The two horns on the ram, one was longer than the other one and grew up afterwards. It's referring to Darius and Cyrus. Darius had command for the first 2 years once they conquered Babylon, but then Cyrus rose up and he began to, and he grew even longer. I mean, 20-something years in his reign, and so on and so forth. Even the horn of Alexander the Great being broken off, it represented the king, which it says here in verse 21. So we know that those are true. Tomorrow, I'm going to give you some things that this Antiochus did. Okay, he was a very ungodly man. Matter of fact, he did some very wicked stuff, and we'll read what he done. He stopped sacrifices. He slaughtered pigs on the altar. I mean, he tried to put himself up as God and everything else. But he doesn't quite fulfill the rest of the visions of Daniel that he had about the end times and the Antichrist that is to come, that'll be above all on this earth until he is destroyed by Christ himself. So I want to give you that today just to get you started on this. Read chapter 8. It's got some unique stuff in it. Some of it, I believe, is still hidden, and the understanding is still hidden there. But I just want to say thanks for being with it. Share these messages and stuff. Tell somebody else. Let me tell you something. Jesus Christ is coming soon. I really believe that. There's some things happening. So make sure you're right with him. This is Brother Perry. God bless you.